It was a Friday in October, the kind of day when the wind is colder than it should be. John stood in front of a gas station convenience store in Billings, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee he didn't even remember buying. His fingers were stiff, not from the cold, but from what had just happened. The silver pickup truck he'd driven with Stephanie and her sisters-in-law had just vanished down the road, leaving only the smell of exhaust in the air and a deafening silence all around. He said nothing. He just stood there motionless, his body still, but his mind spinning in circles, trying to understand what he'd done so wrong to be left like that. They were over 200 miles from home, and she, the woman he'd shared his life with for 8 years, looked at him through the window, smiled as if it were some kind of joke, and sped off. "Find out for yourself," she yelled before disappearing. For a while, John thought it was just another provocation. Stephanie and her sisters loved to laugh at his expense, turning his quiet, methodical manner into a punchline. He always swallowed hard and smiled, trying not to create conflict. But this time was different. He felt it in his chest, like a stone. Her phone went straight to voicemail, just like Jessica's. Vanessa had blocked him months ago. What hurt wasn't just the public humiliation, but the confirmation of a suspicion he'd been trying to ignore for years. He was never part of that group. He was an addition, a tolerated accessory. John wasn't a dramatic man, nor one for making a scene, but standing there, his hands shaking and his heart heavy, he knew something inside him had broken for good. He walked back into the gas station with heavy steps, as if each leg weighed twice as much. The attendant, a young man wearing a backwards cap, barely looked up from his cell phone. John asked if there was a bus to Denver, and the answer came back curtly. "Not from here. Only in Billings, 60 kilometers east." He nodded, thanked her, and left. His pocket were his wallet, his cell phone, and some loose change. Nothing else. His truck had stayed at home in Denver. They'd taken Stephanie's car because it would be more practical, she said. Now, standing there, he understood that everything had been planned. The hotel reservation in her name only, the room shared with her sisters, the glances exchanged in the rearview mirror. It wasn't impulsive. It was premeditated. What he couldn't understand was why. John met Stephanie at a construction site. She was an environmental consultant on the project. Intelligent, confident, charming, the kind who looked you in the eye and silenced the world around you. He fell for her within weeks. The sisters came as part of the package, Jessica always overly opinionated, Vanessa always in the air, but he never imagined they could influence him so much. From the beginning, he felt left out. The inside jokes, the plans arranged without warning, the whispered conversations in the corner of the room. Stephanie said it was just their way. "You'll get used to it." But he never did. He simply adapted, like someone learning to walk on soft sand. Never firm, always tense, always tired. And now, for the first time in a long time, he wondered if it had truly been love, or just a need to be accepted. He hailed a taxi to the Billings bus station. The driver, a soft-spoken gentleman, tried to make conversation, but gave up when he realized John responded only with nods and murmurs. On the ride, he stared out the window at the dry landscape, the distant mountains covered in clouds, and the sky beginning to hint at snow. He thought about everything he'd ignored, how Stephanie had changed plans at the last minute, always because of some crisis her sisters had, how she forgot important dates but never her family commitments. Last year, she missed his birthday dinner because she was helping Vanessa move. 2 years earlier, she'd forgotten her own wedding anniversary because Jessica had fought with her boyfriend. "Family comes first," she'd said. But he was family too, or at least she thought he was. The bus left at 4 in the afternoon. It was over 14 hours to Denver. Sitting in the back, with his coat rolled up as a pillow, John couldn't sleep. He didn't cry, didn't call anyone, didn't try to understand what would come next. He just remembered the conversations, the looks, the muffled laughter. Every detail of the trip now seemed like a sign. How they insisted he not take the truck, how they laughed when he asked why Stephanie hadn't reserved the room in their name. He wanted to believe it was all a stupid idea that got out of hand, but deep down he knew it wasn't. It was contempt disguised as a joke, like so many others he'd accepted to avoid a fight. And for the first time, there on that hard bus seat, He began to wonder what else he'd let slip, just to be a good husband. When the bus arrived in Denver, it was already past 6 in the morning. The city was still waking up, but John seemed to be operating on a different time zone. He took a taxi straight home, unsure of what he expected to find. Stephanie's car wasn't in the garage. The house was as they'd left it. The bed unmade, dishes in the sink, the smell of stale coffee in the kitchen. Everything was the same except for him. He sat at the table and stared at his phone for long minutes, waiting for a message that never came. No, sorry, no, you went too far. Nothing. He got up, grabbed her laptop, and on impulse, perhaps instinct, went through the conversations. He didn't need a password. The open tab showed group messages with his sisters. He read everything. He laughed humorlessly. The jokes, the bets, the comments about him. They'd planned this for weeks. The abandonment even had a name among them. Operation Independence. It wasn't just the pain that overcame him there, but the feeling of having lived with a stranger. Stephanie sent screenshots of their conversations to her sisters, mocked their good morning messages, and made fun of photos of him sleeping. Always disconnected from the world, she once wrote. Jessica laughed. Vanessa called him a big baby. And then came the conversation about Montana. Every detail had been planned. The position, the time to leave him, the prepared speech about learning to be independent. This wasn't just a passing spite. It was scripted humiliation. John closed his laptop and remained silent for a while. Then he went upstairs, packed a bag, grabbed his documents, and left. He didn't leave a note, didn't turn off lights, didn't turn anything off. He just left. And for the first time, he was the one who turned his back. John drove to his brother Kevin's house in Colorado Springs. They weren't particularly close, but there had always been respect between them. When he opened the door and saw his brother standing there with a backpack and a lost look in his eyes, Kevin didn't ask any questions. He just grabbed a beer from the fridge and pointed to the couch. "How long are you staying?" he asked. "I don't know yet," John replied. And that was it. That night, he told her everything. No embellishments, no drama. About the gas station, the messages, Stephanie's laugh, the way they'd left him behind like someone shedding a burden. Kevin listened silently. In the end, he simply said, "You're better off without her." For the first time since everything happened, John believed it might be true. The next morning, John called work and requested a transfer. There was a project in Colorado Springs, a hospital renovation. The supervisor didn't ask any questions. On Tuesday, he started on the new team. He spent the days with his head down, hammering away at walls and thoughts. In the afternoon, his cell phone started ringing. Stephanie, then Jessica, then numbers he didn't recognize. He ignored them all, until he heard a voicemail from her. "Where are you? I got home and you were gone. This isn't like you, call me." It was as if she couldn't see what she'd done, as if he'd overreacted by not laughing at his own humiliation. He blocked the number. An hour later, another number called, and another. The message was always the same. It was just a joke, but in John's body it still burned as if it had happened 10 minutes ago. On Thursday, Kevin came home from the night shift with a tense expression. "Your wife is outside, in the car." John looked out the window and saw Stephanie's, set and parked at the curb. She got out, fixing her hair, and walked toward the building. John met her in the lobby before she went upstairs. She tried to smile, extended her hand, and said she was worried. He didn't answer. He just asked, "What do you want, Stephanie?" She said she wanted to talk, that they needed to resolve this. "Resolve what? That you left me in the middle of the road with your sister's support? That this was planned and executed as a joke?" Her face changed. The worried expression disappeared and irritation entered. "You're overreacting. It was just a joke. You need to learn to handle yourself." There, in the icy silence of that hall, John understood everything. She wasn't sorry. She was just surprised he'd reacted. "I'm not going home," he said firmly. She laughed nervously. "You can't just disappear because you're hurt." John looked at her as if he saw someone else. "Watch me." He stepped into the elevator without looking back. She was still talking, trying to explain, beating around the bush, but he wasn't listening anymore. When the doors closed, he felt strange. Not relieved, not strong. Just tired. Tired of explaining the obvious, of justifying his feelings, of trying to be enough for someone who never really saw him. The next day, he received a text from Jessica saying Stephanie was devastated and that he needed to fix it. He showed the message to Kevin, who replied without hesitation, "Change numbers." And that's what John did. That marked the end, not only of his contact with them, but of the part of him that still wanted to understand why. The following weeks passed slowly but steadily. John began to adapt to his new routine. He worked during the day on hospital renovations and helped Kevin on weekends with small car repairs. He bought a new cell phone, rented a small apartment in the south of the city, and for the first time in a long time, made choices without consulting anyone. He didn't need to discuss wall colors or ask for approval to watch whatever he wanted on television. It was simple, but it was his. Sometimes he still woke in the middle of the night with his heart racing, remembering Stephanie's voice laughing at the gas station. But during the day, little by little, his head felt lighter, less confused. For the first time, he could hear his own thoughts without the echo of her sister's judgment. Then his mother called. John had been avoiding his parents' calls. He didn't want to explain himself before he was ready. But Stephanie didn't wait. She went to their house and told her version of events. She said you had a breakdown, that you left the house out of nowhere and disappeared, that you're not answering her calls. His mother's voice sounded worried, almost alarmed. John took a deep breath. He didn't want to involve his parents, but he also couldn't stand being painted as the unbalanced one in the story. "It's not a breakdown, Mom. I just needed to get away from a place that was hurting me." "What kind of problem can't be solved?" she asked. He didn't answer. How could he explain that the pain didn't come from an isolated incident, but from years of being ignored, belittled, and ridiculed by those who should have been involved? He hung up, saying he'd call back later, but deep down he knew that silence was also a response. The following weekend, John went to Denver to visit an old friend, Marcos, with whom he worked years ago at the same construction company. He'd also attended his and Stephanie's wedding. When John appeared at the door with a weary expression and a shrug, Marcos simply said, "Come on in, I'll get a beer." They sat on the back porch, just like old times. John told him everything. No frills, no scenes, just the facts, the position, the trip, the plan, the humiliation. Marcos listened silently, nodding slowly. When he finished, he said, "I remember your wedding. I always thought it was weird how she was all over you." John frowned. "During the reception, every time you started laughing with the crowd, she'd show up and pull you into something." At the time, John thought it was a nervous bride thing, but now, it all sounded different, and it made more sense than he'd liked. On the way back to Colorado Springs, John passed the house where he'd lived with Stephanie. The lights were on, her car in the driveway. He didn't stop, just watched from afar, with a long, quiet gaze. That house, for so long, had symbolized stability, a future, a life built with effort. Now it was just an address, a place that held memories he'd rather forget. But there, in that moment, an unexpected clarity emerged. He wasn't just running away from something bad. He was heading toward something better, simpler, more honest. He didn't want revenge, nor explanations. He wanted peace. And if it came at the cost of temporary loneliness, he would accept it. Because the worst loneliness was being surrounded by people who didn't see him as he was. And in that house, for a long time, he was completely alone, even with company. In the months that followed, John began to get his life in order. He opened a bank account in his name alone, transferred his savings, and sought out a divorce lawyer. Patricia, her name was Patricia, attentive, direct, and straightforward. When he told her everything, she simply asked, "Do you have proof?" He showed her the messages, the screenshots, the call records. Patricia listened without interrupting. "We'll work this out," she said. She explained that Colorado was a no-fault divorce state, but that the history of harassment and exposure could be relevant. John signed the papers that afternoon, and as he left the office for the first time in a long time, he took a deep breath without feeling tight in his chest. It was as if the air had circulated within him again. The days at work went smoothly. The hospital renovations were progressing well, and John was soon promoted to team leader. He worked hard, but slept peacefully. At night, he started a technical business course, something he'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. When he told Kevin this, his brother slapped him on the shoulder and said, "Now you're becoming a person." They laughed together. It was a clean, effortless laugh. One day, the phone rang at work. It was Patricia. She urgently needed to meet him. At the office, she explained that Stephanie was trying to claim abandonment and ask for most of the assets. "They're distorting everything," she said. But she had something better. Social media screenshots, photos of the three of them at the bar the same weekend as the abandonment, plus the group messages he hadn't seen. "This dismantles their version," Patricia stated firmly. And in that moment, John knew the truth had finally sunk in. The hearing took place on a gray March morning. John wore the same suit from his wedding, now with a different meaning. Across the room, Stephanie was dejected, but tried to maintain her composure. Her lawyer spoke first, describing John as an unstable man who had abandoned the marriage out of pride. He said it was all just a misunderstanding between family members and that he refused to talk or seek help. When Patricia stood, her tone was calm but precise. She presented each piece of evidence with precision. Messages, posts, call logs. She showed that everything was planned, that there was no crisis, only contempt and manipulation. The judge listened in silence. In the end, he declared the divorce granted, assets divided equally without alimony. There was no evidence of abandonment, much less abuse. Stephanie tried to say something in the hallway, but Patricia stopped her. No contact. John didn't respond. He simply left. And it was there, after so many months, that he felt it was truly over. 6 months later, John opened his own construction company. Initially, he did small jobs: bathroom remodeling, painting, and deck installation. Kevin was the first employee. Then Marcos joined the team. His reputation grew quickly: on-time deliveries, honest service, and commitment. He bought a modest house on the city's west side, with a spacious garage and a backyard where he liked to sit in silence at the end of the day. It was a life without luxury, but it was free. A year after his divorce, he ran into Marcos at the hardware store. "I heard about Stephanie," he said. "She married a coworker. It didn't last long. They've already separated." John just smiled. "Want to know what happened?" Marcos asked. "Not exactly," he replied. And for the first time, he felt like he no longer needed to look back. The pain didn't go away, but it no longer hurt like before. Because there, on that day he was left in the middle of nowhere, he wasn't just abandoned, he was also reunited. Little by little, John learned to live with silence. Not the kind of silence that hurts, like the one he felt during his interrupted conversations with Stephanie, but a kind of silence that welcomes. He began to appreciate the sound of his own footsteps in the hallway, the smell of coffee made just for him, the small, everyday choices that no longer needed to be justified. He didn't date again, nor did he search for answers. He simply lived. He worked hard, renovated his own house with his own hands, and rediscovered the pleasure of being with those who respected him, whether a client, a friend, or the brother who never judged him. Sometimes, when he passed a gas station, the memory returned, but not of abandonment, of the exact moment he decided to wait for no one anymore. That image, so painful at the time, was now a symbol of a beginning. That day in Montana changed everything, not because he was left behind, but because he refused to stay where he wasn't valued. It was the kind of pain that reassembles the heart from within. There were no pretty speeches, no cinematic twists. There was exhaustion, silence, shame, and then, very slowly, a reconnection with himself. If someone asked him today what happened, he might say it was just a bad trip. But he would know, and that was enough, that it was the day he stopped trying to fit into someone else's world and decided to build his own. And even without understanding everything, even without knowing how to explain where he found strength, he survived. And in a simple, silent way, he won.